The Mass Repatriation Acts of 1954 and 1965 in the U.S. Stopping illegal immigration. In the 1940s, there was a significant backlash against Mexican immigrants working and living in the United States. This backlash was created by several factors, including an unending demand for labor, government support for growers to get workers by legal or illegal means, and the lack of Mexican government bargaining power. Although the U.S. government encouraged Mexicans crossing the border illegally to work, at the same time many government officials were taking steps to stop it. In the 1950s, U.S. Attorney General Herbert Brownell was a vehement opponent of Mexican laborers entering the country illegally. He went to great lengths to seek congressional approval to use the military to send back undocumented workers. He was cited as saying that one method of discouraging wetbacks would be to allow the Border Patrol to shoot some of them, using a derogatory term for Mexicans. He sent the military to strategic points on the border where illegal entry was common and forced Mexicans over the border. Operation Wetback. In 1954, a repatriation campaign, dubbed Operation Wetback, returned 1.3 million illegal workers to Mexico. Although some migrants were sent back by force and others left voluntarily, it did not end the problem. It merely slowed the influx for a short time but brought no permanent solution. It sent a strong message not only to the Mexican people about their rights to live and work in the U.S., but to white growers as well. They would not be held responsible for the mass migration that they started and perpetuated by actively recruiting and employing undocumented labor. At about the same time, the Bracero program was in full swing. The program allowed Mexicans to enter the country to work mainly in agriculture on a temporary basis. Mexico's border cities were flooded with thousands of unemployed men who knew full well that jobs were waiting for them over the border. Some 88 braceros died of sunstroke during a deportation roundup that had taken place in 112-degree heat. The deportation program left the men hundreds of miles south of the border to stop them from re-entering the country. More than 25% of the Mexicans were deported on hired cargo ships. A congressional investigation said one of the boats, where a riot took place on board, was like an 18th-century slave ship and a penal hell ship. The McCarran-Walter Act and the Immigration and Nationality Act. In response to the Bracero program and Operation Wetback, legislators became more aware of the need to address immigration laws that determined who could legally enter the country and become permanent residents. The 1952 McCarran-Walter Act severely restricted immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe and barred Asian immigration. Meanwhile, migration from countries in the Western Hemisphere was mostly unrestricted. In 1965, Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, INA, which completely changed the system. There are currently two competing views on INA. On the one hand, some people consider it to be an advance in civil rights because it ended the quota system, which gave preference to people from Western Europe. It can be seen as part of the larger civil rights legislation that sought to stop laws that discriminated against specific groups. On the other hand, the law continued to let growers employ immigrant labor on a temporary contract basis. The new laws also emphasized reunifying families and letting in immigrants with needed skills. They irrevocably changed the face of immigration. From then on, applicants for admission would be overwhelmingly Latin American and Asian. The 1965 INA also extended the H-2 visa program that brought temporary farm workers from Caribbean countries like Haiti, Jamaica, and the West Indies. In recent years, they have become a main source of labor for the dirty, dangerous, underpaid, and undesirable jobs that U.S. citizens refuse to do. The effects of the programs. These government programs were designed to ensure that white growers had full access to Mexican immigrant labor. At the same time, repatriation campaigns sent an estimated 1.3 million Mexicans back to Mexico. The contradictory message that Mexicans received was that their labor was wanted but they were not welcome as citizens in the U.S. One of the main results of the program was a steady increase in the number of Mexicans illegally crossing the border to work. This influx was dealt with in three ways. The most common was to ignore them and allow them to seek work in the U.S. The illegal status of the farm workers benefited growers since they did not have to give the workers rights. The second effect was that military tactics were used to control the border, which set the stage for the current situation. The 1965 INA sought to fix the discriminatory elements in immigration law, but it also made sure the growers would continue to be able to use cheap and temporary foreign labor. The third result was the development of organized resistance by Mexican immigrant laborers to fight exploitation.